over time, as we develop a relationship with a property management company, when we start out, it's usually some kind of a fixed rate. And then we shoot to get that number down the more properties that we bring to them. But the challenge is still, you got to get to some critical mass to justify having somebody on payroll. And it really depends on the unit, and in some markets, there's no need for like somebody on site, right? And so in Boston, for example, if you're doing a 30 unit deal in Boston, that's a massive, from a purchase price and a rent standpoint, that's a really large deal. You could afford to have somebody on site there if you wanted to.
Yeah.
It probably makes sense, but you still don't even need to from a management requirement standpoint, right? So you have much more flexibility in a higher priced market. Whereas when we're in Indianapolis, where average prices are 70 to 90,000 a door, average rents are a little bit lower. And we have a full-time person that, hypothetically speaking, if we had a 50 unit asset in that market, we have a 23 unit there. So we don't need somebody on site. But if it was 50, that's a much higher percentage of our overall income, right? So right. It's almost, each market's a little bit different, but that's the big question. And you have to really get on the same page with your management company. And what we really try and do is minimize the need to have somebody on site. So if we have we're working through this challenge with a deal down in Florida right now that's 48 units that we're going to be closing soon, and there's somebody on site there now full time. We want to keep them on, and the challenge is their salaries or percentage of our gross is huge because their average rents there are lower. So we're trying to figure out, hey, how can we manage this with a part-time individual? We'll bump your management fee a percentage, and you can send somebody there every couple of weeks to really keep an eye on the complex and everything like that. We'll narrow down the leasing hours. So you have to get a little bit creative, right? And some property management companies, especially the large ones, they just don't want to deal with this. They're like, now, if there's not somebody there on site, like we're not even really interested in figuring this out. So you really have to find the right management partner with this stuff, which we do in the markets that we buy. And that's a big focus of ours.
Yeah. So, and then you basically invest remotely, right? Like you don't live in Florida currently, do you? So
no, I don't. I live in Boston. Yeah. The only real market that's kind of the local market is we do a lot of business in Manchester, New Hampshire, which is an hour north of Boston, but it's still an hour away. I see the properties that I own up there once a quarter, so it's not that, it's not like I'm up there all the time by any means.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I used to own property in Tacoma. I live in Seattle, and I own property in Phoenix. And I was like, I see my property in Phoenix more often than I see in Tacoma. But interesting. And then, so how do you find the success in like remotely managing? Because that's another hunch. People who are investing are making themselves thinking that I can't manage remotely, especially with small property because they're high touch. How do you kind of find the solutions to that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's definitely a limiting belief of a lot of folks, I think, and it was of mine for a very long time. It took me forever to go out of state, and I knew I needed to and wanted to scale the business, but I could never really get there mentally. And after a while, you kind of just realize like what's different down there that it is in my backyard. If I'm driving around Manchester, New Hampshire, looking at my properties, it's not like I'm banging on the tenant's door and trying to walk around. I'm just like, I drive by, all right, it's still there. There's no trash outside. Good. Right. So it doesn't really change that much when you think about it in that respect, where even if you think about how much you look at what you do locally, and it's probably not that much, like you just mentioned, right? You see your properties in Phoenix more than the ones in Tacoma. And I think that from a people standpoint, you can put the right people in place to make you feel really comfortable. First and foremost, you need a great management company. None of this matters if you don't have a really, really good management company. So once you have that checked, that box checked off, then you can go to the second level, which is managing them in an intentional way to make you feel more comfortable about what's going on. And this is really true for the CapEx part of a business plan, where you're doing renovations and there's, more moving parts than just picking up rent and answering maintenance calls. So what I like to do is regular FaceTimes, right? Every 2 weeks, I have a time on my calendar to FaceTime my property manager in Indianapolis, right? And we walk around on, here's the side of the building, here's how the exterior paint's coming along, here's the inside of the unit, we're making this kind of progress. And that really makes you feel comfortable. And then if you know people in the markets that you're buying in, throw somebody $75 for an hour of their, half hour of their time, whatever it is, your broker contact, a business partner, somebody, meet somebody out there, and you say, hey, I'd love for you to go walk this property with my property management company. I'll pay you for your time. Let me know how everything looks. How do the hallways look? How did the lighting come out in the hallway? Is it bright? Is it effective? How's the parking lot restriping going? Does that look good? Send some pictures. So there's ways to solve it. And I think that just because people aren't there, they're just like, how do I know that everything's happening? Well, you can get your eyes on. I mean, it's the 21st century. There's a million ways to physically get your eyes on a place if you're not local. So I think embracing all of these different strategies is really helpful. And then from a buy side perspective, which is where the real hurdle was for me, how do I know it's a good area, a good market, good street, that the property's not falling apart? Well, understand that it's going to take some money to figure that out. If you're going to put a property under contract, you better be prepared to go down there for a few days and walk the property and walk every unit and drive the neighborhood. And, you should get a feel for that before you go into contract, obviously, but that's also part of it. So just as you do a home inspection and property inspection on something locally, you do the same thing from afar on a deal in another state. It just costs more because you got to go there, right? So understanding that that's part of the transactional process and mentally committing to spending the money on a plane ticket and a couple of nights in a hotel is critical too.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And how do you found these deals? You kind of talked about, actually rewind back a little bit. I'll ask my last question about management stuff. How do you find your manager? Like, because it takes me a couple of tries to find the right management company. I mean, that's really a key over here. So how do you actually find good manager, especially when you're managing remotely?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it takes a lot of it just takes a lot of conversations, I think, is the best way to put it. What we do when we go into a new market and we start looking at deals and we want to build out our team is we find I shouldn't say all, right? That's really hard, but we find a high number of investors that are doing a lot of business, that own large portfolios that we would consider to be successful. So we tap into our network, whether it's LinkedIn or some networking groups we're in, or we go on a site like Bigger Pockets or something, and we build a list of all of the investors that do a lot of business. And then we do the same thing with agents and brokers. I want to know the 5 brokers that do, 5 of the top 10 brokers, really a lot of the brokers that do the bulk of the business. And then we ask all the brokers and we ask all the investors for management company referrals. And eventually you're going to get to the point to where there's a couple of companies, 2, 3, and probably 1, honestly, that's getting all of the referrals. So, A players just know A players. So you ask all the A players who the management A player is, and then they give you their glowing endorsement for a company they've worked with. And you probably narrow that list down to a few, and then that's when you go into your traditional due diligence. You look them up online, you give them a call, you interview them. How many units you guys manage? What's your process look like? Kind of software. Can you give me some referrals to owners that you have managed for in the past or currently managed for? I'd love to chat with them about the experience they've had with you. What's your pricing? All of those different conversations or questions that go into that conversation, I should say. But we're really, really referral based. If I know that this investor that I respect and I think is a really smart individual and they own a really good chunk of property and they're saying, hey, this is who we use, we swear by them, I'm honestly probably just going to use them, right? Go through the screening, but once you screen them and everything works out, and you set your expectations. I mean, this is the other piece too. You really want to set your expectations as to how you like to work as a client. I want biweekly phone calls talking about the progress of a business plan. First few months, I might want weekly phone calls depending on how intensive it is. This is what I want to see on a monthly report basis. These are the KPIs I want to see. Once all that stuff's good and they pass the interview, the big thing is just the referral, because that's really what matters the most. I never do anything without referrals. I'll never look up a list of management companies, for example, off Google and then just start interviewing them, because I have no sense of, going into those conversations if other people think they do a good job. So for me, it's find all the great brokers, find all the great investors, and then you can go a step further and find the great insurance brokers or the great management companies, because they know too. And then just see what names pop up pretty frequently.